quite welcome, Mr. Curtin replied, as if it were Renee who'd been given the present and not himself. And now you may leave. This time Renee needed no urging. He hurried off the plaza and across the rock garden where several students gaped at him, surprised to see him still alive. He even seemed to be happy. Then Renee reached the path and hurried uphill toward the cactopus. Constance stood high above on the hilltop, keeping a lookout, actually doing what she'd been asked to do, which was promising. Behind the cactus, Kate was on her hands and knees, and Sticky stood precariously on her back. He was peering through Kate's spyglass, which he had steadied atop a high cactus branch. "Did he get anything?" Renee whispered to Kate, so as not to disturb Sticky. "You don't have to whisper," Sticky said. "I did get a little, and I'll get more if he'll just write anything. He's on a fresh page." But now he's gazing away again. "Only a little," Renee said. He was turning the pages pretty fast. "Sorry, I tried to stall him as best I could. And I could see only a small part of each page," Sticky said. He glanced down at Renee with an impish smile. "But I do remember what I saw." "Is it any good?" Renee asked. "Beats me. I haven't had time to think about it. There's a difference between remembering and thinking. At least for me." He returned to the spyglass. "Could you see us at all? Kate's forearms and your elbows, but you're pretty well hidden," Renee said. "Anyway, from below, it's impossible to see what you're doing." Oh, hold on a minute. I gotta get my microphone. Hold on. "What about from above?" Sticky asked. "Are we still clear in that direction?" Renee turned to check on Constance. It was good that he did. Constance was hurrying down the path toward him. For Constance, though, hurrying meant running a few steps and tripping, running a few more and stumbling. And walking about 20 yards behind her was Jackson. "Jackson's coming," Renee hissed. He was immediately knocked to the ground. Sticky, in his fright, had fallen off Kate's back and crashed into Renee. The spyglass flew out of Sticky's hand and onto the gravel path, and before the boys could gather themselves, Jackson had brushed past Constance, knocking her roughly to her knees, and was upon them. "What's going on here?" "We were trying to make a human pyramid," Renee said. "A human pyramid with 3 kids?" Jackson said with a sneer. "That's pathetic. And what's this?" He had seen the spyglass and was bending down to pick it up. Kate sprang forward and snatched it away. "It's mine. That's what it is." Jackson stared at Kate, amazed a student had spoken to him that way. Then his amazement gave way to anger. "You'll show it to me here," he said in a threatening voice, "or else in the waiting room. It's your choice, Weatherall." Kate stared back at him defiant. The others held their breath. "Fine," Jackson said with a smile. He was beginning to enjoy himself. "Let me just tell you how this works. I'm about to grab your arm, and I intend to squeeze so hard it hurts, and escort you to the waiting room. If you try to run away or fight me, I'll personally see to it that you get kicked out of the institute. After you go to the waiting room, how does that sound?" Kate had no choice. Reluctantly, she held out the spyglass. As Jackson snatched it from her grasp, Sticky turned away, his face hidden in his hands. He couldn't bear to look. Jackson burst into laughter. "A kaleidoscope? You risked going to the waiting room for a kaleidoscope?" He put his eye to the lens. "Yes, but it's my kaleidoscope," Kate said. "Well, you can keep it," Jackson said in disgust. He handed Kate her spyglass back. "This is the sorriest kaleidoscope I've ever seen." Renee grimaced his way through study time, trying to ignore a broadcast that went on for 2 hours. After it ended, Renee noticed Sticky was still grimacing. Sticky had spent all study time reproducing what he'd seen in Mr. Curtin's journal and was still at his desk. "What's the matter?" Renee asked him. "Did you forget something?" Sticky groaned. "Forgetting isn't the problem. Art is the problem." He threw down his pencil. "There was a diagram in there, but I can't draw worth a flip. Words and numbers, yes. Pictures, hopeless." "You can always try again," Renee said, looking over Sticky's shoulder at the drawing. It seemed to depict a mound of spaghetti with numbered meatballs. "We have a minute before lights out. It'll be easier if you don't have to use the flashlight." "Flashlight or floodlight, it won't matter. I do just as well in the dark. This was my 4th try. It was supposed to be a diagram of Mr. Curtin's brain with lots of numbers on every region. Renee stared doubtfully at the picture. Are you sure it was Mr. Curtin's brain? It said, my brain, at the top of the page. Oh, well, I don't suppose there was a key to those numbers, was there, or an explanation of the diagram? Sticky shook his head. Not on that page. Renee patted him on the back. Then don't worry about it. If we don't need a diagram to know what a brain looks like. Sticky's face shone with relief. Really? Oh, I hoped you would say that. He tore the page into tiny bits. Renee helped him shred the other attempted drawings too, most of which resembled misshapen balls of yarn with numbered threads. They finished just as the girls made their appearance in the ceiling. Everyone was eager to begin. In no time, the lights were off and they were all seated in a circle on the floor. Oh, I have all of the entries written down, said Sticky, showing them a thin stack of papers. They cover a lot of time. The first is from 10 years ago, and the last was written today. Shall I read them aloud? The others agreed, and so, starting with the first entry, Sticky read. No one seems to realize how much we are driven by fear, the essential component of human personality. Everything else, from ambition to love to despair, derives in some way from the single powerful emotion. Must find best way to make use of this. Well, that's cheery, Kate said. I'll bet Mr. Curtin's just a big scaredy cat, Constance said. So he thinks everyone else is too. Sticky, who happened to consider himself a prime specimen of scaredy cat, moved on without comment. The next entry, he said, was dated a year ago. Much to my disappointment, I have concluded there is no such thing as perfect control. I have come to understand, however, that the illusion of perfect control can amount to the same thing. He's all about illusions, Renee reflected. The Institute's lack of rules is an illusion, not to mention its excellent reputation and the emergency, too. The hidden messages make everything seem more hopeless and out of control than it really is. But then, where is this illusion of control? I didn't see anything about it, Sticky replied. He glanced at his papers. The next few entries are all about using children as filters to keep the messages hidden. It's nothing we don't know. I'll skip them for now. I'm afraid the next part is a bit technical. Ready? The others said they were, though Constance squeezed her eyes shut as if expecting to get hurt. And Sticky continued, brain sweeping, a success. High power, close contact transmission works perfectly well as a forcible procedure. Retaining should also succeed. Contentment message will 1. Counteract a brain-swept individual's tendency to question and lessen the chronic mournfulness effect. Predicted side effects of restraining timidity, anxiety, self-doubt. Conclusion satisfactory. Constance put her hand on her head. Brain sweeping must be Mr. Curtin's term for destroying people's memories, Renee said. If they're in his machine, I think that's what he means. By close contact transmission, then he can brain sweep them against their will, which is what he means by forcible. That force must be what happened to Milligan, except Milligan got away before Mr. Curtin could retrain him. But the other agents weren't so lucky, Sticky said. Mr. Curtin retrained them with contentment messages and tell them not to question anything. And to feel less sad, Kate said. But that part must not have worked so well. They all still suffer from that pesky chronic mournfulness effect. There's more about it in the next entry, Sticky said. Long-term brain sweeping and retraining results, mixed. Helpers, manageable, but still dispirited. Worse, too frequent relapse of memory, often as isolation with trigger object. Typical episode begins with the last important thing they remembered, names of significant persons, unfulfilled obligations, etc. Most irritating note. 2 of the last 4 episodes occurred near mirrors. Reflection must be promoting self-identification. Solution? Remove mirrors. Kate rubbed her hands together. Now I'm really starting to feel like a secret agent. We're figuring things out. What's next, Sticky? Sticky checked his papers. We're almost finished. The next entry explains why the special recruits aren't so sad. It's more or less what we thought. Can you just give it in a nutshell? Constance asked, and then added, please. The others resisted looking at one another, and no one spoke. It was perhaps the first time Constance had ever used that word, and though she quite possibly said it by accident, no one wished to spoil the moment. If they mentioned it aloud, she might react to it, and so Sticky only nodded and gave the next entry in a nutshell. Remember when we talked about lacunar amnesia or forgetting particular events? Apparently, Mr. Curtin can use his machine to wipe out specific memories without taking away everything, without doing a complete brain sweep. It makes people dazed for a while, but then they get better and memories rarely come back. So, if those recruits had managed to kidnap us, Kate said, Mr. Curtin would have made sure we didn't remember it. But why special recruits aren't scared? So that's why special recruits aren't scared. But because they were completely brain swept, Renee said, they aren't sad either, which makes them better executive material. I'll bet most of the executives used to be special recruits, maybe even all of them. After all, they had no families to return to on the mainland. I suppose that should make it harder for me to dislike them, Kate observed, since they were kidnapped orphans and all. Everyone considered this for a minute. Then they looked at one another and shook their heads. They couldn't help it. They still disliked the executives. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to help them, Renee pointed out. If Mr. Benedict can figure out how to bring their memories back, maybe they can start over. Maybe they'll learn how to not be so nasty. I'm not holding my breath, Kate said. Sticky flipped a page. Guess what? The date on this next entry is the day we arrived on the island. At last, all facilities now complete. Proper officials in proper places. Public mood at proper levels. The improvement is very close at hand. Everything is ready except final modification and the final few shipments, one of which being loaded even as I write. Farewell. I've dispatched a helper crew to adjust turbine output. Shall require a great deal more from them in the coming days. We saw that, Kate said. We saw them working on the turbines, and we saw the truck of helpers that were loading. Those crates, Renee said. He slapped his forehead. I'm so stupid. It should have occurred to me. He looked at the others, feeling completely foolish. I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. The others looked back at him, having no idea. I liked that part about your being stupid, though, said Constance. Recruiters were driving that truck, remember, Renee said. So it must have something valuable in it, something Mr. Curtin wanted to protect. Why else would it be in such need of security? Oh yeah, I was going to say that, Kate said with a laugh. You're too hard on yourself, Renee. But if I'd thought of it sooner, Renee argued, Mr. Benedict might have been able to investigate. For all we know, the rest of the shipments have been sent out by now. We may never know what was in those crates. Maybe not, said Crate, but we can still report it, and we can keep an eye out for ourselves, right? True, Renee admitted. He still felt like a dolt, but he preferred not to dwell on the feeling. Sticky, how many more entries do you have to read? 2, Sticky said. The next one was just this. Success! As of this morning, the messages are transmitting directly. To my great satisfaction, the Whisperer is now capable of... That's it, Kate asked. Sorry, Sticky said. His hand was covering the rest. The Whisperer, Constance said, so that's what he calls his dumb machine. Renee said nothing. He was wondering what the new thing the Whisperer was capable of now. He wondered, he knew one thing for sure. If Mr. Curtin was happy about it, then it spelled bad news. Sticky was preparing to read the last journal entry. This is where he seems to go completely bonkers. I can't make heads or tail of it. It's Curtin for you. Trust Ledropthia, Curtin. Curtin makes things better. Feel certain about Curtin. No, feel certain with Curtin. Curtin has control. Bizarre, said Kate. Is he talking to himself? Asked Constance. Sounds like he's trying to convince somebody of something, Renee said. But who would that be? It just supports my personal opinion that he's wacko, Kate said with a shrug. But wacko or not, he's awfully careful about keeping secrets, which is why this has been so extremely, marvelously, wonderfully satisfying. Unable to sit still any longer, Kate leapt to her feet, pumped her arms in the air, in a barely restrained whisper, said, Can you believe we actually spied in Mr. Curtin's journal and got away with it? The Cinder himself. I say 3 cheers for us. 3 cheers for the mysterious Benedict Society. Renee and Sticky whispered 3 cheers, but Constance rolled her eyes and said, cheering is for babies. I see you're back to being yourself, Kate said with a chuckle, but I'm not going to let it bother me. Constance scowled and started to reply, but Kate went right on talking. We're on a roll, everyone. We're really getting somewhere. I say we report all this to Mr. B, then tomorrow we take a peek at the loading area with my spyglass. Let's try to figure out what's going on in those crates. The others agreed. They sent their report, and 2 hours later, Renee was drifting away to sleep, having finished an upbeat mental letter to Miss Pernomal, and feeling hopeful for the first time in ages. Maybe he thought Mr. Benedict really could do something to stop Mr. Curtin. And then maybe he could help Mr. Bloomsburg and Mulligan and everyone else get their memories back. It was possible, wasn't it? Renee breathed deeply, stretched out, and let sleep overcome him. As dark as things seemed, it seemed they didn't seem entirely hopeless. The children were finally making some progress. Who knew what would happen tomorrow? Of course, Renee could not know what would happen, and this was fortunate. For if he'd known, he never would have slept so easily. All right, that's the end of 273. Thank you. Peace out.